بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Continuing our reading of the great book of Islam, the book of the Shifa by Qadi Iyad radiallahu anhu, picking up where we left off. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. Section 4 on the inimitability of the Quran. There are many aspects of the mighty book of Allah Ta'ala which cannot be imitated. In order to deal with them properly, they have been put into 4 categories. This section deals with the first of these, which is the excellence of its composition, the cohesion of its word structure, and the purity of its Arabic. This is part of its inimitability because the eloquence of its language is far beyond the norm of the Arabs. Now, of course, a lot of these things would require a deeper knowledge of the Arabic language, but we will still, at least the concept will be with us. Thank you. The Arabs were the masters of linguistic expression. That's the key. A lot of us don't remember that or don't realize that. The Arabs, the pre-Islamic Arabs, were masters of language. And each prophet comes, I'm just curious, why are there so many people tonight? Did something happen? Is there like an invitation? Or is this just an accident? I'm a little overwhelmed. Usually there's a couple people. Allah. I like that answer, Allah. Alhamdulillah. Every prophet that was sent with, like the Quran says, with the language of those people. But it doesn't just mean the language of the people, like they spoke the same language. It also means that they were culturally the same as those people. So, Musa alayhi salam, right? Musa was an Israelite. He was a Hebrew. I mean, he wasn't Egyptian, he was Hebrew. But he was from those people. He was born from a mother and father. He was from those people. And not just that, but he was raised in the house of Pharaoh. So he also learned that way of life. So when he speaks, why do you think Pharaoh's going crazy? Because he's like, you were with us. We raised you. You're from us. That's why he agitates so much. Sayyidina Muhammad, of course, in our belief, was sent to everybody. And he was sent to the Arabs. He came from that region. So he outdid with the revelation what they were good at, which was language. And that's a very significant thing because language is you can think of it as like a technology. And the Quran surpassed the technological use of the Arabic at that time. It did what the poets could not do. It spoke to people a way that the people at that time could not speak to one another. And that's one of the greatest miracles of the Quran. So the Arabs were the masters of the linguistic expression, having given eloquence and aphorisms not given to any other nation. They were given a sharpness of tongue not possessed by other peoples, and an incisiveness of speech penetrating right to the heart of the meaning. Allah gave them that as part of their nature and character. So when you study, or if you study pre-Islamic Arabic, like the Jahili Arabic and the Jahili poetry, it's very colorful, it's very vivid, it's full of romance and love, it's full of powerful languages, powerful words and descriptions. The Arabs are like the Arabian horse, full of energy and blood and emotions, and we tend to be irrational and things like that. It is natural to them to come easily, meaning these expressions. They use it spontaneously to evoke amazement, and it enables them to deal with any situation, speaking extemporaneously. They compose rajas, poems, using powerful language between thrust and riposte in praise and defamation. So they would use the poetry to praise, and they would use the poetry also to curse. When making requests and entreaties to raise up and bring low. By use of language, they work permissible magic and are able to string together adjectives more beautiful than a string of pearls. With it, they can deceive the intelligent, make what is difficult easy, heal ancient feuds, bring ancient ruins to life, make cowards brave, open up clenched hands, make the imperfect perfect, and reduce the highborn to obscurity. All of that from the use of language. Among the Arabs, the Bedouin is renowned for lucid expression, decisive words, superbly clear speech, a pure nature, and a strong manner. Of course, the Bedouin here is the pre-Islamic Bedouin, not the Bedouins of today. The Bedouins of today are driving Cadillacs and whatnot. You know, it's a different type of person. This type of person essentially doesn't exist anymore. The city man at that time, imagine there was the Prophet ﷺ's mother wanted him to grow up in the with the Bedouins because she was scared that the city would corrupt him. The city at that time, how many people could have lived in Mecca? Like 200 people at maximum, or 1,000 people. The city man has skillful eloquence, clear expression, comprehensive words, and easy nature, and the ability to put much splendor of manner into few courteous words. They both have an eloquence containing effective arguments and a driving force which wins the day and opens the way. They do not doubt that words obey their will and that eloquence is the property of their leadership. They possess the arts of language and have discovered its springs. They have entered through all of its doors and built palaces with it. They have spoken on all subjects, both the weighty and the insignificant. They were the masters of both sparring and substantial argumentation. They can converse with concision and prolixity. They contend in prose and poetry. So because of all of these things that Qadi Iyad is saying, the Arabs, the pre-Islamic Arabs, this was their experience with language. So when the Quran comes, it's mind-boggling. It's like they've never heard anything like that. Even though they hear the words, they understand the words of the Quran, but no one's used words like that before. No one's used sentence structures like that before. Even the Prophet's name, Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, as we've said before, it was understood what that name meant, but no one was called Muhammad, or it was very rarely used. So the Quran and the message of the Quran came with that miracle. In addition, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, his own speech, he was gifted with what we call jawami' al-kalim. He was able to say these huge meanings in very small words. So he himself was also eloquent. He was amongst the most eloquent of the people. No one but a noble messenger could have amazed them with a book about which is said, and he quotes from the Quran, falsehood cannot reach it from before it or behind it, a revelation from one who is all wise, praiseworthy. Its verses are exact and its words distinguished. Its eloquence dazzles the intellect. Its pure Arabic overcomes every other speech. Its terseness and inimitability conquer all. The real and metaphoric in it are clearly articulated. The Quran has clear statements and it has metaphorical statements. When something is clear, it's obvious that it's clear. And when something is metaphoric, it's obvious that it's metaphoric. Some of the, like the hadith I mentioned, or some of the things that I alluded to in the khutbah today. Like Allah Ta'ala says, وَاسْأَلِ الْقَرْيَةِ, ask the valley. Obviously, Allah doesn't mean go ask the hills and the trees and the bushes, but ask the people of the valley. Is'al ahl al-qarya. So it's a metaphoric use of language, so on and so forth. Its verses and divisions vie in beauty. Its concise passages and brilliant new expressions make all clear. Its excellent composition is balanced by its concision. The expressions chosen convey a multitude of meanings. So one of the things about the Quran is that all of the verses have an infinite amount of meanings. And that's why every generation of Muslims is able to draw and understand new meanings. That we have the potential to learn things from the Quran today that the people before us didn't understand. Because our world is different than the world that they lived. So using what we know about the world today and knowing what we know about history and so on and so forth, we can also draw new meanings, because the Quran is a living, it is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not confined in time. So therefore, when you read the Quran, it is as if it was revealed at that moment, and its meanings are endless and its wonders are endless. The Arabs are the people with the greatest capacity in this field and had the most illustrious orators, the most contests in rhymed prose and poetry, the greatest usage of rare words and expressions in their everyday language, and the most unique way of arguing with each other. You know, to understand this, you also need to know that at the time, the European languages, the languages that we speak now, that we are using now, were not nowhere near where they are. They were not at that time near where they are today. The first English dictionary didn't come until the 18th century, Dr. Samuel Johnson's dictionary of the English language. So English is relatively new in that case. At that time, at this time, in the ancient world, it would have been things like Latin and Greek, ancient Greek. And Latin died. It's an extinct language. I mean, people can still study it, but no one really speaks it or uses it unless you live in the Vatican. So you have to understand this in the perspective of human history, in the history of human language, that the Arabic that we speak today is still connected to the Arabic of the Quran and the Arabic of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. These are the people whom the Prophet ﷺ was challenging and rebuking for more than 20 years. He quotes the Quran, do they say he has fabricated? Say, then produce a surah like it and call on anyone you can besides Allah if you speak the truth. So this also is a shocking thing, that the Quran challenges people to make something up like the Quran, and no one has been able to. If you have doubts about what we have sent down to our slave, produce another surah, the same as it, and call your witnesses besides Allah if you speak the truth. If you do not do that, and you will not do it. فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا وَلَن تَفْعَلُوا. Len is for the mustaqbal, for the future. So Allah says, you will not be able to, nor in the future will you be able to. And no one has been ever able to imitate the Quran or simulate the Quran or make up something like the Quran ever. I mean, they could have easily done that if they thought that this was fake. They could have easily just made up a couple of things, but they weren't able to. Neither during the life of the Prophet ﷺ or after that. Say, if both men and jinn banded together to produce the like of this Quran, they would not produce anything like it, even if they backed each other up. And say, then produce 10 invented surahs like it. So the Quran over and over and over again challenges people to make something up that's similar to the Quran. It is easier to plagiarize than to originate. Writing something false and fabricated is far easier. So he must have been thinking of ChatGPT. Qadi Iyad must have been thinking of ChatGPT. The phrase which is striving after a sound meaning is more difficult to compose. That is why it is said, so-and-so writes as he is told, and so-and-so writes as he wants. The first is better than the second, and there's a vast chasm between them. Right? So plagiarizing is easy. You can take somebody, writing and, edit a little bit and massage the language a little bit and fake it, and then you make something that's your own. So they could have done that, but even then they weren't able to do that. The Prophet ﷺ continued to rebuke them with the harshest rebukes and reprimand them in the strongest possible terms. He called their dreams foolish and abased their nobles. Their social structures were shattered. He censored their gods and their own selves as well. Their houses and properties were taken as booty. Despite all of this, they shrank from confronting his challenge and proved themselves unable to produce anything like it. They deceived themselves by making trouble through rejection, self-delusion, and forgery. They said, quoting the Quran, this is nothing but magic from the past. This is nothing but the words of a human being or a continuing forgery. It is a lie which he forged and the myths of the ancients. They lied and were satisfied with baseness. So after the Prophet ﷺ's prophetic mission, nothing remained really of the Arabs except their language. And what was preserved from their language, some of their poetry and obviously their usage of the language, but there was no political structure or there was no philosophical structure that remained. Nothing remained of that except the language itself, which was completely taken by Islam and then used through the Quran and the traditions of the Prophet ﷺ. Whereas in the Western world, and this is a huge difference you have to understand when you want to compare the East and the West or Islam and Christianity, in the Christian world that's not the case. In the Christian world, antiquity continued to vie with Christianity even until today. Even in the high works of the Renaissance, in the Western world, they still use the gods of Olympus and Greek mythology to talk about stories and things like that. So there's always this vying of both paradigms. But in Islam's case, that's not the case, at least not in Arabia. That was just completely done with. No one talks about Al-Lat and Al-Uzza and things like that at all, except when we recite them in the Quran. As Allah Ta'ala says, it is as if they said, our hearts are uncircumcised. Our hearts are covered up against what you call us to, and there is a heaviness in our ears. There is a screen between us and you. Do not listen to this Quran, drown it out so that perhaps you may gain the upper hand. And there were some people of the Quraysh, when the Prophet ﷺ would recite the Quran, they would start yelling and banging and things like that. So people wouldn't listen to it. Their presumption of capacity is illustrated by their saying, if we had liked, we would have said we would have said the like of it. And Allah says to them, you will not do it. And surely enough, they did not do it and were powerless to. Any foolish person, such as Musaylima al-Kadhab, the false prophet, whom the Sahaba defeated in the eastern part of Arabia after the passing of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, who tried to do it and had its faults exposed to everyone and was stripped by Allah of the fine words he had written. He tried to write like a fake Quran, Musaylima. I think it's like at-tuffah, wa ma adraka ma at-tuffah, and things like that. Some nonsense. Tuffah is apple. If that had not been the case, who killed Musaylima? Wahshi. Oh, you guys are remembering, alhamdulillah. If that had not been the case, the people of intelligence amongst them would not have realized that the Quran was something more than their own form of pure speech or eloquence. When such people heard the Quran, they came away submitting to it, either guided or at least enraptured. So the Quraysh, when they heard the Quran, they were enraptured by it, even though they rejected it. That's what drew them even more crazy, is that they loved to hear what he was saying from the point of view of the eloquence of the Arabic language. The verses, like at the Surah Al-Najm, the famous story of Surah Al-Najmi, إِذَا هَوَى مَا ضَلَّ صَاحِبُكُمْ وَمَا غَوَى وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَى. At the end of that surah, there's a sajda. And at the end of that surah, when the Prophet ﷺ was reciting it, everybody made sujood, even the people of Quraysh. And there was an old man who couldn't prostrate, so he took the dust from the earth and he put it on his head and he said, this is enough for me. But they didn't believe, but they were still compelled by the power of the language. And that's why, as Muslims, it's very important that we also take the mastery of language very seriously. Any language that we speak in or that we conduct ourselves in, we must be as articulate as possible. This is why when Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira heard the Prophet ﷺ say, Allah commands justice and acting in the best way, he said, by Allah, it has sweetness and it has grace, meaning what he heard. The least of it is abundant and the highest of it is fruitful. No mortal could have said this. Abu Ubaid al-Qasim ibn Salam mentioned that a Bedouin heard a man recite, shout what you are commanded. He prostrated and said, I have prostrated because of its fine Arabic. Another Bedouin heard a man recite, when they despaired of moving him, they conferred privately apart. He said, I testified that no creature is capable of these words. It is related that one day Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu was sleeping in the mosque when someone suddenly stood at his head testifying to the truth. He asked him who he was, and the man told him that he was of the Byzantine generals who knew Arabic and other languages as well. So this was a Roman soldier. He had heard a Muslim captive reciting the book, and he said, I reflected on it, and it contained the same as Allah sent down on Isa ibn Maryam alayhi salam, regarding the states of this world and the next. What he had heard recited were Allah's words, and he quotes, all who obey Allah and His Messenger and have awe of Allah and show fear of Him, it is they who are the victorious. And this is essentially the same thing that the Najashi said to the companions who presented Islam to him in Abyssinia. When he heard the Quran, he said, this is exactly what Christ brought. This is the same thing, same source. This is the same thing. So people that are genuine, they will hear, when they hear the message of the Quran, they'll hear it's the same. This is what a religion is supposed to talk about. Maybe the messenger is a problem. We're often the problem. But the message, if the person is pure-hearted, they'll find it. Al-Asma'i, famous linguist, related that he heard a slave girl say something and said to her, confound it, what has made you so eloquent? And she said, is this to be a considered eloquence? After the words of Allah, we revealed to the mother of Musa, suckle him. وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَّا أُمِّ مُوسَى. In a single verse, there are two commands, two prohibitions, two pieces of information, and two pieces of good news are joined together. Let me just track down that verse. وأوحينا إلى أم موسى أن أرضعيه فإذا خفت عليه فألقيه في اليم ولا تخافي ولا تحزني إن راده إليك وجاعلوه من المرسلين. This is verse 7 of Surah Al-Qasas. So she says to Al-Asma'i, who was a master of the language, if you look at this verse, in one verse there are two commands. Suckle Moses and throw him in the river. So those are two commands. And then there are two prohibitions. وَلَا تَخَافِي وَلَا تَحْزَنِي. Do not be sad and do not be fearful. So these are two prohibitions. And two pieces of good news. إِنَّ رَادُّهُ إِلَيْكَ. We will return him to you. وَجَعِلُوهُ مِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. And we will make him from the messengers. So she read in this verse, this is just one verse. And she's like, look at all what's going on. There are two commands, there are two prohibitions, and there are two glad tidings. All of that in one, phrase. But we don't talk like that to each other. We don't say that. To say those things, if I said, tell me to do two things and not do two things and give me two pieces of good news, you'd do it in a paragraph, or at least you'd do it you'd say 6 sentences. But this is in one verse. So this is what we call the rhetorical structure of the Quran. This is from the balagha of the Quran, of how the Quran is constructed. This type of inimitability we are citing is unique and bears no relationship to anything else. It is sound on two counts. The Quran came through the Prophet ﷺ, and he brought it. This is definitely known. It is also known that the Prophet ﷺ made it a challenge and the Arabs were unable to respond to it. It is known without doubt by those who know eloquence and the techniques of rhetoric, and that its eloquence is a miracle. The way that someone who is not one of the people of this art knows that it is a miracle is by the incapacity of the skilled people of that art to respond to its challenge and the fact that they have confirmed the inimitability of its eloquence. There's also two other points I want to add to this. Number one is the Prophet ﷺ spoke his own language, right? Those are the hadith. And then the Quran was revealed to him over 23 years, piecemeal. So it's impossible for somebody to speak in two ways over 23 years consistently. In other words, he could have done it once, right? He could have faked it. But how could he, basically for his entire prophetic life, for those 23 years, the Quran is being revealed and he's issuing these verses, teaching them, and at the same time he's doing his own talking, which we have documented. And if you look at them, they're different. That in itself is a miracle, and also proves that the Quran is different than the speech of the Prophet ﷺ. The other thing about the Quran that you will notice is that it's not really studied other than by the Muslims. So there are no real Orientalists who study the Quran, because nobody cares to spend that much time to learn the language itself. They'll always study obscure things and weird things and things that are largely of no real consequence. They're just maybe of academic interest. But very rarely will you find, especially today, you will find people in the academy, I'm talking about non-Muslims in the academy, that will actually be experts of the Quran. They can talk about the Quran, they can cite facts about the Quran, but they don't know the Quran. They don't know the Arabic of the Quran. They don't have the Quran memorized or parts of the Quran memorized, or they're not able to engage the Quran at this deep linguistic level. And for me, that's a sign. That's a sign that why can't you do that if that's your focus of study? Why don't you? Where is the leading Orientalists of Quranic studies? They don't exist. All you need to do is reflect on the words of Allah. There is life for you in retaliation. This is in the verse of the blood money of the diya in Surah Al-Baqarah. And if you could see what when they are terrified and there is no escape and they are seized from a near place. And in Allah's verse, or Allah saying, respond with that which is better. And if there is enmity between you and him, he will be as if he were a warm friend. فَكَأَنَّهُ وَلِيٌّ حَمِيمٌ. That verse. Also, it was said, earth swallow your waters and heaven stop, ending the flood of Nuh alayhi salam. And also Allah's words, each we seized from his wrong action, against some of them we sent pebbles. There are many of these verses such as these, indeed much of the Quran. You have seen what we have clarified concerning the concision of its phrases, the abundance of its meanings, its finely woven expressions, the excellent formation of its letters, and the harmony of its words. Each phrase contains many degrees of meaning and overflowing oceans of knowledge. Volumes could be filled with just some of its benefits, and numerous treatises have been written about what has been discovered in it. There is discussion about how the long stories and histories of the previous generations flow into one another, which would normally be considered weak and lacking in clarity by the people of eloquence. In other words, when you read the Quran, it's not in a chronological order. One verse talks about Yusuf, then another verse talks about Nuh, and then another verse talks about the Jannah, and then it talks about Adam. It's all over the place. Now, if I told you that I was going to present the history of the prophets in that way, you'd be like, you got to order. We did that in this mosque, the Qisas al-Anbiya. We didn't teach it like that. But when the Quran discusses it like that, it's like, that's amazing. It's like unbelievable. It's like the night sky. You look at the night sky. I mean, now we don't have a night sky anymore because we have artificial lights. But for those of you who can remember when there weren't any artificial lights, you look up at night and you see all of these stars. They all look random. They all look like they're just all over the place. But if you study the night sky, you can start to see the constellations. Right? The verses of the Quran are the same way. They're like the stars in the night sky. At first glance, they look like they're all over the place. What happened to in the beginning? God created the heavens and the earth, and God said, "Let there be light." You know, in the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible, our scripture is not like that. Our scripture begins, "Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen," so on and so forth. So think of that example of the night sky. There is discussion about how. No, we did that. In fact, it is a sign for the one who reflects on it with regard to the cohesion of its words and presentation, and how all the different facets are put in balance. Like the story of Yusuf in its entirety. That's an exception, right? Because the chapter of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam is a chronological or ordered narrative of the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. When these stories are repeated in different places in the Quran, the expressions used in them vary so much that it is as if each instance where the story occurs is totally unique in the way it is elucidated. This aspect of counterpoise is part of its beauty. The self never feels averse to repeating these stories, nor is it hostile to hearing them again and again. Section 5, the inimitability of the Quran's composition and style. So just so everyone remembers what we're talking about the Quran as being the greatest miracle that the Prophet ﷺ was given. The second aspect of its inimitability lies in the form of its marvelous composition and rare style, which is so different from the style of the Arabs and their methods of composition and prose writing. The divisions of the verses stop and finish while the words continue through. Right? So even though we have the verses, but in a way you can continue. You don't have to stop at the verse. You can join several verses if you have the breath, and you can keep going through. This sort of thing did not exist before or after it. No one was able to do anything like it. People's intellects became bewildered by it, and their intelligence abandoned them. They were not guided to the composition of any language like it, whether in prose, verse, rhymed prose, or poetry. In other words, if I wrote a speech, I'd have to stop at the sentence, at the periods. I can't keep going. It can't be like a run-on sentence. Now, if you read the other scriptures, it's the same thing, because the other scriptures are written by people. They're not revelation. I mean, they originally were revelation, but the scriptures that we have today, obviously they were written by people. So because they were written by people, one of the proofs that they were written by people is that you can't do that. You can't just keep going. You have to stop. But the Quran is not like that. I think in Ramadan, didn't we ask Anas to read the Fatiha with one verse? Was that in Ramadan, right? I think he got it at the last try. So you can read the whole Fatiha in one verse, in one breath. If you have the breath to do it, you can do it, and it doesn't change its meaning. It doesn't sound like you're just having like a run-on sentence. Right? That's something that you never think about. But in the Quran, it's completely different. You can just keep going. And sometimes you can stop in the middle of the verse. So on and so forth. When Al-Walid ibn Mughira heard the ordinary speech of the Prophet ﷺ, and then the Quran was recited to him, he softened. And Abu Jahl went to him and rebuked him, and he said, by Allah, there is none of you who knows poetry better than I, and by Allah, his ordinary speech does not resemble this Quran in any way. Poor Abu Jahl, he's just trying to find anything to argue with. That's why he's called Abu Jahl, because he's just completely ignorant. He's not getting it. Another tradition reports the Quraysh gathering together at the time of their annual fair. So they had an annual fair, Uqaz, in Mecca, and saying, the delegation of the Arabs are coming, so let us agree on one opinion about him so that we will not contradict each other. So this was in the first 13 years in Mecca. The Prophet ﷺ used to use the annual fair occasion to give da'wah to the other Arab tribes. So the people of Quraysh, they thought that this was a problem. So they said, we have to tell the other Arab tribes something about Muhammad ﷺ. What are we going to tell him? Let's be united and have one thing to say. So they said, we will say that he is a soothsayer. Al-Walid said, by Allah, he is not a soothsayer. He does not mutter nor speak in rhymed prose. So they said, he is mad, possessed by a jinn. And then he said, he's not mad, nor is he possessed by a jinn. There is no choking nor whispering. In other words, he's not speaking in tongues. They said, okay, we'll say he's a poet. And then Mughira said, but he's not a poet. We know poetry in all of its forms and meters, and he's not a poet. So they said, we will say he's a sorcerer. So he said, but he's not a sorcerer. There's no spitting and no knots. In other words, he's not doing the things that magicians and sorcerers do. They said, then what will we say? He said, you have not said anything about this matter which I do not recognize to be false. The closest you have come to in the statement is that he's a sorcerer, for magic is something that can come between a man and his son, a man and his brother, a man and his wife, and a man and his tribe. Then they separated and sat down on the road to warn people, and then Allah Ta'ala revealed the verse about Walid, leave him to me whom I created alone. So even when they tried to criticize the Prophet ﷺ and the Quran, they did not know what to say about him because there was no category. But he created a new category. He created a new category. That's why it was complete. His message and the prophetic message was completely disruptive to the people of Mecca at the time. When Utbah ibn Rabi'a heard the Quran, he said, O people, you know that I have not left anything without learning it, reading it, and saying it. By Allah, I have heard a type of speech, and by Allah, I have never heard anything like it. It is not poetry, it's not spells, nor is it soothsaying. An-Nadr ibn al-Harith said something similar. In the hadith of Abu Dhar becoming Muslim, he describes his brother Unais. Abu Dhar had a brother Unais, and he sent his brother to go to Mecca to learn about the Prophet ﷺ because he was intrigued, and he came back and he didn't really have anything beneficial to say, so he wanted to go himself. That's the story of the two brothers. By Allah, I have not heard of anyone who knows more poetry than my brother Unais. He contested with 12 poets in the Jahiliyyah, and I was one of them. So you know, like in Japanese samurai culture, like the samurais, they fight one another. Well, in the Jahili period, the poets, they used to do that with each other, but with poetry. They used to compete with one another. I'm assuming they didn't kill one another afterwards, but like the Japanese, but I mean, it's the closest example I can give. This brother went to Mecca, and on his return, he told Abu Dhar about the Prophet ﷺ. Abu Dhar asked, what do people say? And he replied, they say that he is a poet, a soothsayer, and a sorcerer. I have heard the words of the soothsayers, and this is not like their words. I compared him with the reciters of the poetry, and it was not like them. No one after me should err and say he was a poet. He is truthful, and they are liars. Right? So when you hear the Quran, what is it? They're going crazy. We say, well, it's the Quran, right? That's its own category, right? But they didn't want to believe in that category, or they were resistant, so they were trying to find some, column or some, box to put the Quran in. The traditions about the inimitability of the Quran's composition and style are sound and numerous. Its inimitability lies in both things: the concision and eloquence itself, and extraordinary style. From the point of view of revealed books, the Quran is relatively short. I mean, the Vedas are, I don't know how long there are many Vedas. The Hebrew Bible is long. The Gospel is shorter but still longer. The Book of Zarathustra, the writings of Buddha, all of these, the Analects of Confucius, so on and so forth. All of these are longer works. But the Quran, subhanAllah, in a way, it's shorter, but at the same time, it's not shorter. It's like an ocean of meaning, right? Every year we gather in Ramadan and we hear the whole Quran, and all we want is more. We just at the end of Ramadan, like, can we just have one more day, one more week, one more recitation? It's just so powerful, mashallah. Properly speaking, each of them constitute a different type of inimitability, and the Arabs could not duplicate either of them, since each was beyond their power. It was different in its pure Arabic and the words it used. More than one of the Imams has held this view. Now, the Arabic language, as a language, there are more words in the Arabic language than are in the Quran. So the Quran is not all of Arabic by any means. There's many more words, obviously, in language. But the words that are chosen by Allah Ta'ala in the Quran, there's like something about them, right? There's a special meaning that this word was used here. And there are some words in the Quran that are not repeated in the Quran. Some of the ulama, they compile these type of things. And there are words that are repeated often in the Quran, like Ar-Rahman, Rahim, things like that. But there are words in the Quran you only find once, like qitmir, a word like it only appears once in the Quran. And there are many of those type of words, which is also, from the miracle point of view, miraculous, that these odd words, I don't want to use odd as in bad, but unique words are not repeated, for example. Obviously, if the Quran was from the Prophet ﷺ, there would be a lot of repetition, because he would be the author, you would see that. But the fact that there's this uniqueness in the revelation also adds to the fact of its miraculous nature. One of their followers believed that the Quran's inimitability consists merely in the sum of its eloquence and style put together, and made a statement to that effect which both ears and hearts reject. The sound position is the one we have presented, and knowledge of all these matters is definitive and clear. We have only stated what is well known to the masters of the science of eloquence and the adab of this craft, who are penetrating it in thought and tongue. Meaning there are difference of opinions of the miraculous nature of the Quran, but he, as he has consistently done throughout the book, is presenting the mainstream Sunni position. The Imams of the people of Sunnah have disagreed about the way in which the people are incapable of imitating it. So what is it about the Quran that's not imitatable? That's the debate. Most of the ulama said, what is not within the capacity of a human being is the force of its lucidity and clear expressions, its beautiful composition, its terseness, and its wonderful structure and style. These things are part of its miraculous nature, which are beyond the power of created beings to imitate, in the same way that miracles such as the bringing the dead to life, transforming the staff, and the glorification of the pebbles and beyond them. Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari, who was the Imam of one of the great theological schools of Sunni Islam, the Ash'ari school, on the other hand, believed that its imitation is something which is within the capacity of the human beings, and that Allah could give them the power to achieve it, but this did not and will not happen. And this is what is known as a debate within theology. Is it impossible for us to do it, or is it possible but it has never happened? So Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari, he says the second. It's rationally possible that somebody could make up a half a verse or something, but it still never happened, which means that it's even more of a miracle, that it is possible, but it still never happened and will never happen. Allah has prevented them from achieving it and has made them incapable of doing so. A number of scholars hold this position, and it is based on two arguments. The first, and of course, Qadi Iyad, being a Maliki, he is an Ash'ari. So the Ash'ari school is the main or dominant school of Sunni theology. The other school of Sunni theology is the Maturidi school. Those are the two schools of Sunni theology. So when we refer to Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, that means we refer to the theological structure laid by both the Ash'ari and the Maturidi school. And the differences between those schools are very, very few things. There are almost no differences whatsoever. The first is the already established fact that the Arabs were incapable of it. It would not be valid to have held this against them if it had not been within the power of the human being to achieve it. So this is one argument that Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari has, radiallahu anhu. The second is the known fact that they were challenged to try and imitate it. This proves their impotence more effectively, and it makes them more worthy of rebuke. So this is a very strong proof. He's saying because Allah says in the Quran, فَأْتُوا بِمِثْلِهِ, bring a Quran like this. This is proof that it is humanly possible to imitate the Quran, but still it's never happened. So that's his, he's defending his position. A justification could be found for their incapacity if they were being challenged to do something which is not within the capacity of a human being. This is an overwhelming proof and definitive argument. In any case, the Arabs were not able to imitate the Quran but suffered instead many casualties and the evacuation of their city Mecca. They drank the cup of humility and abasement, having been previously among the haughty and the disdainful. They most certainly did not voluntarily choose to suffer this and were not pleased when they were forcibly compelled to do so. If it had been within their power, it would have been far easier for them to have risen to the challenge, which would have brought them quick success, a definitive victory, and it would have finally silenced their adversary. The Arabs were amongst those who had a great power of speech and were in fact exemplars of that science for all people. Each of them tried his best and summoned all his powers in the attempts to eclipse the Quran's appearance and extinguish its light. They could not come up with any hidden depths, nor produce a drop from the springs of the waters of their being. Despite the length of time they spent trying, their great number, and the fact that they were aiding and abetting one another. On the contrary, they remained speechless, unable to utter a single word. They were cut off and their way was blocked. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Any questions?
Question?
Everyone,
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum
Jazakallah
assalam.
khair. Very nice presentation. Really appreciate it. And this kind of subject is very much needed. One question. You said the one word that came in the Quran only once. Can you please repeat that one again, a little bit, elaborate that? please?
قطمير.
Kashmir. What does it mean?
قطمير. Yani something very small.
Jazakallah khair.
Yeah, there are many of those words. That's just one that comes to mind. Sister Sonia.
I don't know if this is sort of too theoretical, but my understanding is like as part of our belief, Allah give me belief, inshallah, is that like the Quran is like uncreated and like it sort of exists before time. And so sometimes it's hard to reconcile some of these points about, I guess, the Arabic and the specificity of the Arabic language with that. Like, does it exist like in a different way? Because it came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's like with Sayyidina Jibreel. So like in that process, was it, I don't want to say changed, but like, I don't know, I hope that question makes sense.
The Quran, the definition of the Quran is that it is the uncreated, eternal, uncreated speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Quran is one of Allah Ta'ala's attributes, like Allah's mercy, like Allah all-knowing, like Allah all-seeing, like Allah being al-wudud, al-jabbar, al-munta, etc. Like those attributes, but those attributes are eternal and uncreated because Allah Ta'ala is eternal and uncreated. So the speech of Allah, the kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also eternal and uncreated. But the Quran is not all of Allah Ta'ala's speech. It's some of Allah Ta'ala's speech. So there is other speech that belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He spoke to the other Anbiya, that He will speak to us inshallah Yawm al-Qiyamah, etc., etc. So the Quran is not all of Allah Ta'ala's speech, it's some of Allah Ta'ala's speech. But yes, it is eternal and uncreated, and people lost their life over this debate. I mean, this was a huge fitna at the time of the creation of the Quran. The Mu'tazilites are a non-Sunni theological group that posited the createdness of the Quran, and they used the political power at their time to impose this theological belief. And many great ulama were jailed, tortured, and died in jail. Imam al-Shafi'i's Khalifa al-Buiti was incarcerated over this because he refused to yield. He was taken to jail in Baghdad and he died in jail. So this was a big fitna at the time. Of course, now no one knows about this, alhamdulillah. So we don't have to worry about the fitna. But it's uncreated and outside of time. Does that answer your question? Or is there? Or I feel like maybe I made things more confusing for you. No. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a comment, Imam Tariq. You mentioned about the miracles of the Quran, and we see a lot of children today attending the class, and it occurred to me that this is probably one aspect, the miracle of the Quran, that should be inculcated in the children as well, because they read a lot of books. All of us turn the pages without realizing the power of the written word. It brought to mind what I think you mentioned and others have. Right in the middle of the Quran is the word Latif.
Mm.
Dead center
Yeah.
of the 6,600 and whatever
34.
number of words. Dead center is this word Latif.
That's right.
That in itself, I think, is a miracle. But it occurred to me that us as parents, as grandparents as well, and as children who come to the Sunday school, the Quran class, that this is an aspect that we should try to spread in them, because then they will distinguish the Quran from other literature as well.
Yeah, the thing about the Quran, as we know, it's something that we recite all the time. So it's also a very practical book, because we can't pray except by reciting the Quran. We pray 5 times a day, so that's a lot every day. So we're always using the Quran. Whereas in a lot of other religious traditions, their holy books are not really read frequently or in its entirety, or it's not very practical the way it is for the Muslim. And then all of our du'as, they're integrated in the du'a, are verses of the Quran. There are verses of the Quran that are du'a, so we say those du'a as well. And then there are the statements of the Quran that we say when something happens, if something good happens, if something bad happens, if we celebrate something. So we use it for istishhad, like whenever we have to prove something or establish something, we're always quoting from the Quran. So it's just a very useful, practical book. And because of that, the word Quran itself is something that is read over and over and over again. So that's one of the blessings of our faith, is that it's really made easy for us. The Quran just kind of flows through everything that we do. Hamakumullah. You okay? Do you want to give him can you give him a Kleenex box? So anything that we have memorized of the Quran, it's something that we're going to constantly be reciting and reading and going back to over and over again. And then when you read it over and over again, it becomes a part of you. It becomes a part of who you are, and it's something that's enmeshed in your being. And that's really the goal of the Quran, is it to become part of your heart like that. We ask Allah Ta'ala to make that easy for us all, inshallah.
Thank you very much. I don't have a question, but I request you to explain it. So far as the languages are concerned, since we touch the languages, especially language of the Arabic language, the basic 3 units of all the languages on earth, I mean the languages of the planet, there are three basic units: the subject, the verb, and the object. Like I like you, so I is the subject, like is the verb, and you is the object. So this is in English. Like that is in Arabic. Like ana imshi fil bayt, ana subject, imshi the verb, fil bayt the object.
In a verbal sentence, yes.
So this is structure based
Yeah.
structure. But in Latin it is the opposite. It is it comes the subject, then comes the object, then the verb. And what is the structure? Since this is a miracle with a universal code, this Quran. And what is the structure of it?
The structure of Arabic?
Of not Arabic, of Quran itself. A language of the Quran.
Well, the language of the Quran is Arabic.
Yeah.
So it's going to follow the basic structure of the Arabic. It's either going to be a noun, or it's going to be a verb, or it's going to be a preposition.
No, أنا أمشي في البيت, it follows the same as in English.
But أنا أمشي في البيت جملة فعلية. It's a verbal sentence. A verbal sentence has the subject, the subject, the verb, and the object. Right? أكلت التفاحة. You know, I ate the apple. Right? But that's the verbal sentence. But we also have الجملة الإسمية. كتاب الطالب, the book of the student. Right? So the structure of the Quran will follow the structure of the Arabic language, beginning with it's either a noun, an ism, or a fa'al, or a verb, or a harf, or a preposition.
So it's interchangeable.
Naam.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And about this, and the speech of Allah Ta'ala Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, that all is not his speech, but even the story which is told by Allah Ta'ala Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, he speaks it. Even the story speaks. Story of Musa, story of Pharaoh, story of the Lut. He presents this story before us, but he speaks it.
He speaks it, but his speech is out of time because it's his speech.
No, because he told that all is not his speech. All is not speech of Allah Ta'ala Subhanahu wa Ta'ala.
The Quran is part of Allah's speech. There is other speech of Allah that we haven't been given or we haven't seen. That's yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You were talking about ChatGPT, making a joke, right? I think I'm in a higher ed, we are also encouraging our students to use it, right? And what do you think the impact of artificial intelligence to understand Quran better, or religious education? What do you think overall? Because you also mentioned that, right? We are understanding Quran differently than people they lived before us, right? It may open probably new.
Yeah, I think artificial intelligence can be very useful for the future of education in general, but artificial intelligence is only going to be as intelligent as the people that program it in the beginning. I mean, all of these things require some level of human intervention in the beginning. And then the users, I mean, some of the things that people ask artificial intelligence is stupid. So if you use it for stupid things, you're going to get stupid results. So sort of what we were talking about today in the khutbah is that you have to ask the right question to the right person. So the artificial intelligence can be tremendously beneficial, can be tremendously beneficial to us to help teach people a part of the deen and things like that. But that will not substitute the need for each individual to learn the things at a certain level themselves, because it has to be a part of you. If you're always going to rely on that technology and you don't have anything, then you're not going to get very far. So I think it's only going to be as smart as the users are.
And artificial intelligence cannot substitute man, because artificial intelligence cannot have emotion.
That's another aspect. It can substitute a lot of, there's a lot of people that I would not like to deal with anymore ever in my life. I'm very happy that for artificial intelligence to do that. I look forward to that, inshallah. But yeah, it can't solve everything, obviously. But there's been a lot of talk now about the use of artificial intelligence in education and Understanding Quran, yeah, but I mean, to understand the Quran, you need to know what the words mean. And the words of the Quran are only the Arabic words. You can't translate it and then understand it. You have to learn what that word means in the Arabic language. And, but yes, of course, it can help us. I mean, cinema, movies, all of that technology helped us understand a lot of things of the Quran, because there were a lot of things that we would not be able to see or understand, before 200 years ago. But with the advent of this type of technology, we have now a kind of a view. So there's no stopping. There'll never be an end to how much we can learn from the Quran, without doubt. And I have no doubt that artificial intelligence will play a role in that.
But still, artificial intelligence is still dependent wholly on the human being, because it needs an input.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. It's like the algorithms that the social media companies have. I mean, they all have a human hand in the beginning. They act like they don't, but they do. And I've met a lot of those people, and they're dumb. And that's why it produces dumb results, because they're dumb people. They're just very rich and powerful, but they're actually very stupid. And that's the problem. The problem is they're not very intelligent. So if the human agent in the beginning is dumb, then the thing is going to be dumb. It's just going to regressively produce dumb results. And that's why we are in the situation that we are. Just because somebody is rich doesn't mean they're smart. I've met many rich people that are as dumb as a doornail. I mean, very rich people that are dumber than a doornail. So don't equate wealth with intelligence. So yeah, you need the human input. And now they're talking about ethics, and they're talking about regulation and things like that. So there's a lot still to come. But you can't run the prayer like through artificial intelligence. I mean, the imam has to lead the prayer, right? The imam has to recite the Quran and lead the prayer, and so on and so forth. Yeah, well, I mean, many imams, not our imams, but many imams are like robots. But yes, you need actual breathing human being to do that.
But not tajweed or tartil, because it needs emotion. Slow, it goes up, then up, then down, then slow, then stop. Can't have that from the audio, because there is also emotion involved. Emotion. That is why some people say they have shed tears. Or actually, they cannot shed tears.
Anybody have any other questions? Yeah.
How can we teach our children to see the beauty of Quran and become more like interested in it linguistically and by meanings of the Quran, like the small children?
Yeah,
like
for them
young
to learn some of their meanings as they're memorizing it. If they just memorize it mechanically, which you can do, it might not stick. They might forget in the future, but you have to learn some of the meanings. Yeah, so in part of that, if they learn the meanings, just what it means, what they say, and to bring out some of these nuances of the verses and the power of the words, that makes it more exciting.
When they study Quran, they recite Quran, and
Yani
they
basic,
recite on the
just
side of
just a basic tafsir, in any language, just a basic tafsir, just so they have some understanding of what they're reading.
Because most of the tafsirs we have at home, they are for like adults. The language level is very high for like the sixth grader, third
No,
grader.
there are many simple tafsir, like tafsir al-Jalalain, something like that, which I think the whole thing is translated into English. I mean, that's just a very simple. It's just like one word describes one word. I mean, it's very simple. Okay.
By Mustafa Khattab. Mustafa Khattab, he has a PhD from Al-Azhar in translation. And
Okay.
he did a beautiful work on the clear Quran for kids.
Okay.
It's 4 volumes. It was just finished this month. So I really recommend all
The
the
clear
parents
Quran for kids.
should have it in their house.
Do we have a copy here?
No, it just got published.
Okay.
So
Why don't you have a
inshallah
copy?
we'll get it. I think it's just been released. It should be on
Okay.
Amazon. The
Well,
clear
hopefully
Quran.
we'll get a copy so people can see
Mustafa
it, but that
Khattab.
will be, there you go. That's a good resource.
Any other question? Thank you. Salam alaikum. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل أفضل صلاة على أسعد مخلوقاتك سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم عدد معلوماتك ومداد كلماتك كلما ذكرك الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكره الغافلون. And it's a tradition in the Azhar. It's a tradition in the Azhar that we end our classes with this salawat. It was also used as a sign that the student has passed his exams. When the student passed his exam, he'd be sitting there terrified, and then all of the mashayikh would recite the salawat so he know that he passed his exam. I'll bring the translation next week because I've done a translation. I think you asked in the past, and I have it. I'll bring a translation, inshallah. But this is the salawat attributed to Imam al-Shafi'i, and okay, it's just a custom. That's how we end our classes. Good. Well, there's a lot of barakah in that salat. It's a great prayer on the Prophet ﷺ. All good begins and ends with Sayyidina Muhammad ﷺ. So, as the people of Sayyidina Muhammad ﷺ, we always want to remember that. And the book is about the Prophet ﷺ. I'll bring the translation next week, inshallah. Tomorrow's program is at 7:30. It's a program that we're having with the Idara Ja'fariya, a local Shia mosque that we've invited to the mosque to have a discussion on the legacy of Imam al-Hasan and al-Hussein alayhim as-salam, the two sons of Sayyidina Ali alayhi salam, the grandsons of Rasulullah alayhi salam. And there's a spirit of unity that we reached out to them, and we've actually reached out to them for a long time, but we've never been able to actually do it. So this in itself is like a feat that it's actually happening. And out of respect for our guests, we offered to them that we would delay the Maghrib prayer, as I mentioned today at the Salah. So we will have the adhan at the adhan of Maghrib, but we won't actually do the prayer until about 10 or 15 minutes after Maghrib comes in, because in the Ja'fari madhab, they wait a little bit until the red of the sky disappears for them to begin the Maghrib prayers. Out of respect for them, we're going to delay, which is okay for us because it's within the time. We'll pray Maghrib, and then we'll hear from Imam Abdul Jalil, their Imam. He will speak, and then I'll speak afterwards. Light stuff, but the point is to open up the mosque and to let them know that we want to work and collaborate and things like that. And hopefully this will be the beginning of something fruitful, because the intra-religious dialogue never really happens. We never really reach out, and I think we should do that. It's an obligation for us to do that before we reach out to members of other faiths, I believe. And because there are several Shia communities in the area, this is an effort spearheaded by Imam Rifai. Allah bless him for this effort. So this is what will be happening tomorrow, inshallah. 7:30, and we'll end at 9. There are refreshments, right? Yeah, there'll be some, obviously, food and things like that. So everyone be on your best behavior. If you hear anything that upsets you, just let it slide. And it's like a family reunion with family members that you're always fighting with. So we'll be on our best behavior, and we'll put our best foot forward, and inshallah Allah will bring the hearts together.